And this is Wendy, Dame Wendy Hall. She is my primary supervisor. Everybody be very nice, and all questions have to be basically compliments.
Wendy, you haven't started, so your talk is in the future and therefore fake.
Absolutely. That's perfect deduction from the title. Thank you, Harold. That's what it's meant to be. You picked it up. Okay, so I'm afraid I couldn't talk about what the theme was that you threw at me about 2 weeks ago because I wanted to talk about this. And I'm going to Singapore tonight, which is why I haven't been here all day, and I'm doing a talk 9 o'clock Monday morning in Singapore called The Future is Fake. So you've got the beginning of that talk, which I think, but it is about text, but also multimedia stuff. Because my alternative title was The Future is Multimedia, which of course where I started in my career, but I've only got 15 minutes, so...
10, plus 5-minute dialogue.
Oh, you didn't tell me that, I read 15. Anyway, okay, plagiarism, you all know, we've lived with this for years and years and years. That's the... I've been plagiarising from Wikipedia. Is that allowed? I don't know, but we all know in this room about publishing material that you copied from somewhere else and you've not referenced or cited it. It's always been a problem. It's easier to plagiarise in the digital world. So it's always been a problem since we've had printing. Like here's, I think there's a... Oh, bugger. Sorry, did I say that? I've just been rushing around so much today. In the paper world we've had plagiarism, but it was harder to detect it. In the digital world it's both easier to plagiarise and easier in some ways to detect. That's a matter of opinion. Some cultures consider what we call plagiarism more like flattery, so I often have a problem with Chinese students who think that actually quoting you without quoting you is flattery. It's part of the culture. And we have to teach PhD students the difference between referencing and plagiarism. We've always had fake news in the media. This is something I took again from Wikipedia, an illustration from 1894 with the words fake news on. I thought that was good old Wikipedia. And this is my favourite from English literature. Those of you who aren't British, English. The Sun is our big gossip tabloid, and this is the favourite, Freddie Starr Ate My Hamster, which was published in 86?
I think so, yeah.
86? Anyway, some beauty. This is where they still had page 3 girls, by the way, topless page 3 girls. Said that Freddie put her hamster in a live sandwich and ate it.
He mistook it for a ham sandwich. It was a hamster sandwich.
Maybe he did. He was a comedian. So anyway, was that fake news or not? I don't think it was ever actually established. At the beginning of the Web Science Movement, we were involved with a body called the Media Standards Trust, formed by the newspaper industry in the UK, largely around the Levinson inquiry, as a result of the Levinson, which was actually about journalists hacking phones like Prince Charles and Princess Diana. But they are a sort of a media self-regulating group, talking about accountability. They published several reports. And then, of course, in the 2000s, Facebook started in 2004, Twitter in 2008. So you see, Facebook's only been around for 15 years. It seems so dominant and has changed our culture so much, but it's a very recent phenomenon. I tried to find online today an early tweet. So if anyone can find an early tweet that was obviously fake news, please send it to me. I can use it in my illustration. I can plagiarise you and use it in my talk on Monday. The person who, of course, is attributed with the term fake news on social media is Trump, but I showed you an illustration from 1894 which had the word fake news on a newspaper, so I don't think he was that innovative or novel. No surprise there. But our world has changed dramatically, and politicians now in many places in the world actually tell you what they're doing by Twitter now, which is quite phenomenal. When Trump goes, either next year or in 5 years' time, I suspect we won't see the end of presidents putting their thoughts out on Twitter, maybe in a more diplomatic way, but And we are in the midst here, though most of you are probably British and will be voting well, if you're in Northern Ireland, where's the chaplain called? But anyway, voting in the election on December the 12th, which the amount of fake news, lies, and just simply horrible stuff that's going around is embarrassing. And what's happened to our politics is just embarrassing, whichever side of the Brexit debate you're on. We're living through a blitz, an absolute blitz. I don't know if the rest of you, I can't bear to watch the news at the moment. It's just awful, with all the politicians getting at each other. And I don't think we've seen the end of this is partly because they can do it so easily. And then, of course, another type of fake news is what's produced by bots, okay? Like picked up with the Cambridge Analytica story of the effect possibly on the Russian bots and Cambridge Analytica targeting people on Facebook through profiling, maybe in the referendum, but some in the presidential election. And I know our security services are working very hard to make sure that we don't have hacks and attacks during the election process on our social media, and I'm sure they'll do the same in the US next year.
Sorry.
This is, again, an example. This is I didn't have time to reference it properly, but this is from Wikipedia. This is a reference from a library association of how to spot fake news with a list of checks and things you could do. But of course, sometimes it's really, really hard to know where it's come from and why you've been sent to read it. And now we can fake almost anything, not just text. We can fake video and audio and photograph, speech. We have this incredibly awful world of deep fakes now. You know, where the media take a person existing image or video and replace them with someone else's likeness using artificial neural networks. And there's a film just been released, this was inevitable, that's got the guy who died on
James Dean.
James Dean, thank you, in it. New film.
2 minutes.
Oh, right, not far on. And that is not Mark Zuckerberg. This is OpenAI. Elon Musk started this. It's now gone. It started as a not-profit. It's now gone profit. And they declared that their system, they couldn't release it for creating news, was so good at creating. They couldn't release it. It was so dangerous because it created fake news. Now, one interpretation of that is that it's not good enough, right? If you want to produce news, it should be true. So if they say they can, it's easy. I would have thought relatively easy to produce fake news, but maybe it's harder than you think. Anyway, that's their interpretation. And this is my last slide. Of course, true or false? Truth and falsehood are not absolutes. Religion, flat earth society, there's lots and lots of things you can think of. I always point people to look at Wikipedia as an example of best practice of governance. And there's an example here where China and Taiwan are clashing over the definition of Taiwan. The Chinese call it a state in East Asia, but Taiwan... Oh, no, sorry. The Chinese changed it to a province in the People's Republic of China, but the Taiwanese call it a state in East Asia. But you can see the provenance on Wikipedia. I think the role of data provenance in AI, tracking data provenance, I think we've got to tackle this. So we know how to do it, it's just a question of how do we get the world to adopt it. Auditable expendable AI are part of this, and you've got also what are governments doing about this. In China, you can't say things about the government itself without going to jail. Singapore, this month, have passed a new law that says Singapore's new law to combat fake news has come into effect despite criticism from sector. Legislation gives government power to order social media sites to put warnings next to posts authorities deemed to be false. Authorities deemed to be false. In the UK, it's just finishing. In the UK, we've got an Internet Harms White Paper which puts the regulation onto the social media companies. There's also moral pressure. We stop people smoking without making it illegal, largely. You've also got social credit rating systems, which we see as the devil incarnate when we look at the Chinese version, but maybe we can make them work in democracies.
Questions? Full of praise. Oh, questions?
No.
Harold, your finger's almost up.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Thanks, Wendy. Hope it goes well in the future in Singapore. I've got two little points.
Because it
One
didn't
is,
go well.
I hope it goes, sorry, I hope it goes better.
Stop digging.
You said how embarrassing it is, all this fake news. I'm not so sure. It's like the worries about gender bias in AI.
I'd say it's embarrassing in how our politicians are behaving, that's what I meant.
No.
That's what I meant in that statement. But the behaviour of politicians, not just fake news.
Gender bias in AI is not worrying about AI. It is discovering the bias that was already there in the data.
Yes, I know.
And that is good.
Yes,
So
that's
the
good.
embarrassment we've got in the, grant you the distinction, the embarrassment we've got in the social media is actually good because it is exposing something that's been going on that hitherto we haven't worried about. Now we're worrying about it. That is good. And then the second thing you said about the authorities in Singapore. I've tried being an authority on Wikipedia and I've done a bit. So how do you... The issue isn't how Wikipedia works, it's how
No,
you
the issue
define
is
what an
Singapore's
authority
government
is.
say
Sure,
what
sure,
is and
sure.
isn't false. I did say earlier in that slide, I think that Wikipedia is a very good model of governance in this, and we should look at how you could use Wikipedia to apply governance in this sort of world.
Yeah,
I think it's
process and its definition of authority are completely different things.
sorry.
It's process, which is good,
Yeah.
and the definition of authority are different things.
To be discussed, yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, it is quite effective, Wikipedia. It's not perfect, but it's quite effective, and I hate to think of a world where it didn't exist, because you can, to a certain extent, trust it. Otherwise, we have the option of the governments regulating, which is what's happening in China and Singapore. They say what's right and what's wrong. In the UK, we're asking the social media platforms to regulate, which A, they can't do and still survive as companies, and B, do we really want them to be our censors? So then we come back in the middle. I was being rushed at the end here. In the middle, you've got how do we play a role in this, is the social technical piece. And on Monday, I will go more into the issue of morals and ethics when I have more time, because there is the issue of what's morally acceptable and what isn't. And the social credit rating system that they're beginning to evolve in China, I do think there's some good elements of that if we could make it work in democracies and still have free speech. So, I think we as a society, and this is why I plead for socio-technical work in like web science, AI, because you really need to think this through as individuals, society, governments, industry. How do we all work together to make this a sensible world?
Before we get to you, Tom, for a question, just a brief one. What about the notion that I've come across of not banning lies, Wendy, or banning political advertising, but banning targeting of political advertising? So at least everyone sees the same social media
yes,
posts.
that would be an idea, but my question is, all these things, how do you police them?
Yeah. Tom?
Don't we need to make a distinction between two different uses of the term fake news?
Or there's a multitude of them, but yes.
Yeah, well in particular, when Donald Trump says fake news, he means something that's true.
He doesn't agree with
It
it.
is personally inconvenient to him,
Right.
whereas a lot of fake news is actually made up. And so Facebook, for example, I don't agree with Facebook on a lot of things, but one of the things I do agree with them on is they prefer to call that false news, because fake news is a term that has been devalued by its use by a certain orange person.
I will certainly make sure I make that point on Monday, because it's in my head.
Thank
Yes.
you, Wendy.